Like a mid-90s version of Microsoft, we're all waiting patiently for the window to open. So in the meantime, eventually, let's chat transfers. Welcome to the Blue Monday podcast. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Blue Monday podcast, following the fortunes of Ipswich Town since 2022, I think it is, according to my clock. I am Craig Bimbo, and joining me, giving the public what they want, i.e. sexy transfer chat, is eventually Joe Fairs. Joe, do you want to tell all the boys and girls what's been going on and why you're just slightly dishevelled and a little bit hot and flustered?
Yeah, no, apologies to everybody who's waiting. It is all my fault. It was my computer just at all. And now I've sorted that out. Well, I haven't sorted that out. It's still not on. So I had to get my laptop out, and then it wouldn't allow any access from a mic, a camera, this, that. Got it all sorted, got it there. Then you couldn't hear me. Then it wasn't recognising anything. So it's been a frantic, half hour trying to get this sorted. And apologies to everybody.
Well, I shall leave it up to, say, the boys and girls to let you know whether you get that forgiveness or not. You know, it's entirely up to them. Right. What we're going to do, boys and girls, as I say, we're going to chat some transfers. So what we'll do, the plan is for this close season, what Joe and I will do now is sort of provide a stake in the ground of where we are with regards to squad depth and any transfer rumours that have cropped up so far in the press, on Twitter, on rumours, sites, etc., etc. And then, as and when further announcements or rumours crop up, we'll be providing updates as and when, little videos, bits and pieces, depending on how real the rumour appears to be or how strong that news appears to be, etc., etc. So that's sort of what we'll be doing from now here on in throughout the transfer window and throughout the summer. So what we're planning to do tonight is, as I say, we'll step through the squad. We'll look at any potential gaps that we think we've got, look at all the rumours about who's potentially filling them. Joe will have a couple of suggestions about realistic alternatives to the ones that have already been mentioned in and around the press. So please do get involved in the chat. I see lots and lots of people there already being overly kind to Joe in the circumstances.
I can't see the comments tonight, so you can hide all the nice ones from me.
Oh, okay. In that case, they're giving you an absolute battering. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the squad, say from goalkeeper through the fullbacks, centre backs, centre midfield, attacking midfielders, and strikers. So if you guys in the chat want to, for example, chuck out some suggestions as well, I'll try and catch them as we go on. But so we'll do it in that order. So if you've got a realistic suggestion for a striker, for example, save it a little while until we get round to that area of the team. In terms of transfers, Joe, it's quite difficult to know where we're placing ourselves at the moment, isn't it? You know, regarding the level of transfer, the level of player that we're looking at, because before we've signed anyone, it's difficult to judge. It's not really until we get that first one or two transfers through the door that we get an indication of where we're aiming, I suppose.
Yeah, because we know the Americans have basically said we're going to be as ambitious as we can be, but we also know we've got sort of profit and sustainability rules that are holding us back on that side. I'm sure we can all assume that Kieran McKenna's staying. He'd have had some promises made to him with regards to how ambitious we're going to be in the market. So again, it feels ambitious, but again, with the rules there, attracting the players here, how do you get them? So yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting window. And like you say, I don't think it's going to, until it starts to fall into place, we're not going to know where we're going to end up, because you look at players and think, oh, well, it's sort of like, not him, because he's probably going to go to Southampton, but you sort of Flynn Downs, Taylor Holt, Bellis's, Adam Armstrong's that we potentially be looking at from Southampton. It's like, well, are we going to look at players without that Premier League experience, or are we going to be going for that there? And then you see some early links in the window, which we'll cover tonight, sort of like Eddie Nketiah and Emile Smith-Rowe. And you think, well, they're going to be on like 100 grand a week. So they seem unrealistic. And then you see today a couple of names linked in the papers and you think, well, are they ambitious enough? So it's going to be very difficult. But I think we've got to remember, as we'll show the squad thing in a minute, we're going to need to sign about 10 players in this window. So they're not going to be 10, 15 million pound players. So you might have 2 or 3 stars, 2 or 3 good starters, 2 or 3 solid squad options, 2 or 3 just flyers almost, and sort of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And but what we found, we can only go by the rumours that are out there in the ether. And I say we'll see from those that we've been linked with so far. There isn't an awful lot of Premier League experience players being linked to us at the moment. And we know that we get through quite a few of our deals without there actually being many, if any, leaks before the event until someone's sort of in the building, as it were. And until such time as someone's following them around the Ipswich Town one-way system, tailgating them in their car. But I suppose like Burnley's transfer dealings from last year sort of showed that, you can spend the thick end of £100 million and not buy anyone with any real Premier League experience. And that ends up costing you, doesn't it, in the long run? There is a certain element of Premier League experience needed in the signings, and I say there aren't that many names that have been linked to us so far that have got that under their belt. Right, okay, so let's have a look at our squad as it stands at the moment. Apologies for anyone that's listening on podcast, but you're listening after the event. You're listening at your leisure. You weren't sitting around twiddling your thumbs like the poor people on YouTube who are watching it live. What I'll do is I'll pop this up. Oh, said the actress to the bishop. I'll pop this up as we go through the squad and as we go through the positions, just to sort of give everyone a reminder of where we're at in terms of squad depth, etc., etc. So we'll start off with goalkeepers. Goalkeeping is potentially the most up in the air position, obviously with regards to the Hladky contract situation. We're led to believe that there's been one on the table for a month or two, if reports are to be believed, and it's a good 2 or 3 year contract that's there ready for him to be signed. And then I suppose we've also got the situation with Walton. We don't know what his situation is about staying, leaving, happy to be a number 2, etc. Joe, what are your thoughts about the style of keeper we should be looking for before I go to the actual links that we've been linked with?
Well, I think we know that Václav Hladky took the goalkeeping onto a new level last season for us. Like we all thought Christian Walton was a great keeper, did brilliantly for us in League One, and I think we were looking forward to seeing him in the Championship. But the way that Vas played, so comfortable off both feet, short passing, long passing, it just really added another facet to our game. And I can't see, when you look at a guy we've signed for the long term in Kieran Slicker as well, he's very much that type of keeper. And I can't see that we're going to try and go away from a keeper who's very, very comfortable with their feet. And again, you go into the Premier League, you might need more than that. You might need a keeper who can dominate his box a lot more. But it is, for me, that's the type we're going to be going after, and that's the type we need. And it's going to be very, very difficult to find someone. You look at Leicester, for example, last year they signed Hermansen. Is he a Danish international, an Icelandic international? And he looked very good. That was sort of 5-6 million, and it's just trying to find someone with that Premier League experience as well. It's we're in the best place to be looking now, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, that's right. And we've been having chats in the Telegram group about it, and sort of I'm of the opinion, and so we'll talk about the links in a sec. I'm of the opinion that now we're there, you could probably cast your net a little bit wider, and your pockets are obviously a little bit deeper. That you might be able to find a keeper on the European stage that we're not aware of that is able to play with his feet and also save those odd goals that Hladky potentially didn't. But what's your gut about the Hladky situation?
My gut is that he'll stay. I still think he'd be. This is probably the first big contract of his career. When he left Salford to sign for us, that was seen as the first big contract of his career, and that was when he was signing for a League One team on sort of probably £5,000 a week. Where now he's in the Premier League, signing for, you'd imagine, for something 4 or 5 times that amount. He's 33, he's 34 in October, November, so this is probably his first and last big contract he's going to get. So he's got to take his time and get the right deal done. But yeah, my hunch is he'll stay, because ultimately he's now a Premier League keeper. No other Premier League team is going to sign him. So it's just unless he wants to go back out onto the continent. But then if he goes onto the continent, are you going to get a European club coming in after you? Because that's really like sorry, when I say European club, I mean a team who's in European competition. Because realistically, to compete with a Premier League team on wages, you need to be a big hitter out on the continent. So there's been talk of, I think Celtic is an option where Joe Hart has obviously retired this summer, so maybe there was talk of them being linked, and he was previously at St Mirren up there, but who knows? But he hasn't had the experience of top flight football anywhere. So I think personally, I think we need to do all we can to get him to stay, because I think he's been a real bonus for us this season. And I know there's been talk of he's letting some that he shouldn't have done, but when you look on the TWTD, he was man of the match 7-8 times at Sladkey. Leicester away, he's gone there, had a brilliant game, kept us in the game, and he's let in maybe 3 or 4 that he could have done a bit better with, but what keeper hasn't? Like I say, when we talk about the links, one of the links is Carl Rushworth?
Rushworth, yeah.
The Brighton keeper was on loan at Swansea last year. Well, at Portman Road, as a ball slips in under him at the near post, which you'd have expected him to do better with, he struggled with his feet a little bit, and the sort of crowd were baying for him at one point because he looked like he sort of had a couple of mistakes in him. And I think you're going to find it difficult to replace Hladky. So I did like the story from Alan Nixon in the paper today read along the lines of, if Ipswich can't get Hladky to stay, then Carl Rushworth is someone they're going for, and that's what I'd be doing. I think I'd be trying to keep him to stay, and if not, signing someone of sort of Rushworth's ilk. But I'd also be trying to sign somebody ahead of both of them, who's a Premier League experienced keeper.
Yeah, well, it was you say about Rushworth. So yeah, he's one of the 2 goalkeepers so far have been linked, both Brighton goalkeepers, incidentally. Rushworth, 22 years old, as you say, he's on loan at Swansea last year. He's been linked a couple of times with us in the last couple of weeks. I did do a little bit of research, believe it or not, earlier today. I just had a look around some of the Swansea forums, and they were saying, one of the quotes was, "I'm fairly confident he can nail a number 1 spot in the Premier League, despite how shaky he is with his feet," which sort of thinks, well, he's probably not the sort of goalkeeper that we're looking to hang our hat on at 22 years old to kick us off in the Premier League. Anyway, and the other one, is it Jason Steele from Brighton as well? 33, pretty much the other end of the career spectrum, if you like. He's at a prime age for a goalkeeper, like 33 years old, similar to Hladky. More probably better known for being at Borough and Blackburn in the Championship. Played 17 times for Brighton last season in the Premier League. So again, a keeper with a little bit of Premier League experience, but you would probably hope that, as Joe says, if Hladky signs, then we get someone that's better rather than someone that's really equal. You'd have thought it's a position where I think we probably do need strengthening. There's a couple of names being put in the chat. I'll just quickly pop those up. Colin said that he'd go for Cooper, presumably the Plymouth rather than the Pool.
It's another guy that hasn't got any top flight experience, though, isn't it? For me, I think it's a must. And like I say, we've seen Hladky at the top of the Championship, and his footwork at that stage, and it was excellent for 99% of the season. There's a few mistakes in it, as you expect, but he's shown he can do it. He's shown he has the confidence to play that way, and I haven't seen a lot of Cooper with his feet, and I think that's probably because of who he's played for. So I think you just need somebody who, maybe like a Spanish keeper who's played in the La Liga or stuff like that, but I haven't looked up to see.
No,
I haven't looked up to see who they are, but I think you need someone like that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Jack here saying he really likes the Luton keeper, forgets his name. Les Seeley, I think you're talking about there, Jack, but I'm not entirely sure he's that good with his feet anymore. So that's really all we've had in terms of links with goalkeepers. So we'll quickly move on to the fullback position. Right back, Joe, are we pretty much covered at the moment in terms of having Clark and Twanzebe there, or do you foresee a situation whereby Twanzebe potentially gets slid across into the centre, and therefore we're after another right back? I think we're assuming that Janoy Donassion will move on once he's fit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think Janoy will go. I do think Twanzebe is more of a centre back. He did well for us at the back end of last season, started for like 12 of the last 14 games when he hadn't sort of managed to get into the team before then. But he still doesn't give you what Harry Clark can give you going forwards. And I think you do need a little bit more from your right back that he was giving us, because we effectively ended up really more in sort of like a 3-5-2 than the sort of 4-2-3-1 with Wes Burns playing deeper and Tuan Zabi there. But he's done really well. But I think he will end up more as a centre back for us at this level. And Harry Clark's had operation on both his Achilles this summer, so you can't imagine he's going to be fit for pre-season and ready for the start of the season. So that's probably an area where we need someone in, and I like someone a bit more orthodox right back who can come across at centre back and that the other way.
Yeah. Okay. But so we haven't actually been linked with a right back as such so far. Well, although we'll talk about one when we get to centre back, who potentially is a sort of similar mould to Twanzebe, actually, in terms of their the way they play and the positions that they play. In terms of left back, here we've got Humphreys as the cover for Davis. Again, really, in terms of the style of player that we'd potentially look at, Joe, for a left back, do we look for a carbon copy of Leif Davis, or do you look for a carbon copy of Harry Clark? You see what I mean? Do we look for another flying left back, or do we look for a more solid left back?
I think you've got to go for a flyer at left back, and maybe you hope that one of your sort of left centre backs can help you out more that way, like Twanzebe does the other way. Because I think the way the team is set up in that sort of asymmetrical way, I don't think it's one that you could say, we're going to play a more Clark-like left back and a more flyer at right back, so that we sort of switch it all around, because there's too many moving parts around there. There's too many patterns that break down with that. So I think you do need a sort of a Leif Davis backup who does it. There's sort of been links with Ryan Sessegnon from Tottenham, who is very much in that sort of flyer category, not played a huge amount of football over the last, sort of 3-4 years. And it's, but he is someone that really does fit the profile, and maybe a year or two sort of backing up Leif, or a year backing up Leif Davis, get some minutes here and there, might be what he needs for his career to try and get fit for a whole season. Because I guess his options are either effectively drop down to the Championship and play every week, or try and stay in the Premier League and try and get enough minutes to get your career back on track. And it's just difficult, because Leif Davis is very, very resilient, reliable. But if you had someone of Sessegnon's quality backing him up, I think maybe you would allow Leif Davis a bit more of a rest, and they would be able to push each other on, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You say about Sessegnon, he's the only left back that's been linked with us so far. Out of contract with Spurs, didn't play at all last year for them due to injury. He cost 25 million quid when he moved from Fulham to Spurs, however many years ago that was. And he's actually been linked with going back to Fulham and potentially Palace as well, apparently. So as you say, Jay, he's going to be a bit of a risk in terms of his injuries, but potentially, if he has got over those injuries and he comes good, it's a risk that could potentially pay off, isn't it?
Yes, it could, big time as well.
Yeah. Moving across to our centre backs. We've got a few there, but obviously in terms of Baggett and Indaba, we're not entirely sure how much they'll be involved with the first team. It certainly, in terms of the two. Let's say three. Let's go for three. The three guys that played the majority of minutes last year, in terms of Burgess, Edmondson and Wolfenden. Until, again, we start seeing some signings in the door, it's difficult to know how they're viewed within the halls of Portman Road. Do we, like we were talking about goalkeepers, Joe, is it an area of the team that needs a bit of experience, do you think? Premier League.
I think so, yeah, and that Premier League physicality as well. Obviously, Twanzebe, we know, can show that he's got that, but we haven't seen Wolfenden at that level. Burgess, like I say, he looked like he struggled in League One physically at one point, and now he's been an excellent Championship defender. So you see whether he can continue that rise. But we do have the potential that any of these guys that have been so good in the Championship could just smash their head up against an ability ceiling when they go into the Premier League. And we don't know who it's going to be, but there's a couple of those guys that are so important to us, whether it be Cameron Burgess, whether it be Luke Wolfenden, whether it be Connor Chaplin, whether it be Nathan Broadhead, whether it be Massimo Lawton, who are just going to hit the ceiling and just not be able to compete at this level. So you just have to try and get yourself covered on that. I'd personally say Twanzebe gets seen more as a centre-back. I wonder whether George Edmondson is a player that might leave the club. He's got a couple of years left on his contract. He's a centre back, but he obviously wants to play games. I think he started 10 league games last year, and you imagine he's going to start less this year. Because he's got two people already ahead of him in that position in Wolfenden and Burgess, and potentially Tuanzebe. And you imagine there's going to be at least one signing in this position. So what is he going to want to stay here as fifth choice centre back? Realistically, that's what he's going to be. So I think we end up maybe bringing in two there, bringing in sort of one sort of very experienced leader to try and sort of pick us up originally there, and then maybe one more to compete with the other guys. But yeah, I think someone like Edmondson, it might be that his race is run at Ipswich.
Well, and two of the names that have been linked with us don't, again, as you're talking about at the very beginning about Premier League experience not currently being linked to us, the two names that have been linked with us so far, Dan Ballard from Sunderland, who's only 24 years old himself, but we know he's a very decent player in the Championship. Sunderland are currently trying to tie him down to a long-term deal, but if he knows there's interest from the Premier League, I can't imagine he'll be signing that anytime soon. And Japhet Tanganga has also been mentioned a couple of times earlier on, just as the season finished, I think, and certainly most recently this afternoon, actually. He's another one that's been released by Spurs. Had a good season last year at Millwall on loan. Luton are said to be interested. Obviously, it's a lazy comparison by myself to Tuanzebe, but he's another one that can play both centre-back and right-back if needed. He's played a few times in the Premier League, and he's a free transfer. So he might be one that we'd be looking at just for a bit of versatility as well, Joe, do you think? And the potential, talking about ceilings, he might have that ceiling to push on if he comes good.
Yeah, and what sort of mentioned at the start of the pod, we're going to sign 8 to 10 players. They're not all going to be big fee players. If you can get a couple of smart free transfer additions into your squad, which Japhet Tanganga would be, then yeah, maybe he's one you pull the trigger on. But then he's finally played some games. He's gone to Millwall, played a lot of games in the second half of last season, really impressed them. I think there's a deal ready for him to sign there that they're desperate to get him to do. And it's just, does he sort of one in the hand, bird in the hand and all that? He knows what he's going to get there. Or do you come here, try and make another go at the Premier League and potentially go back to not playing week in, week out? So it's a interesting one. But again, it's another player of that profile, almost of a sort of three at the back profile as opposed to the four. And when you look back last season, as an example, like Wes Burns' Trivella, is Harry Clark flying past him that opens up the space to do that. Is that what we want in the Premier League, or are we going to try and be more solid as we were at the sort of back end of the season with back three? I think I'm sure there'll be a plan which Mr. McKenna has, but it's just a case of trying to see how that works out. Maybe the transfer business will go that way. But I like Dan Ballard, but I think he's one of those players that could be a really good signer, but he could also be a player that just comes in, ends up struggling because of the step up and not being able to make it. And I say he looks like a player that probably needs to go to a more established Premier League team to be fed into it. Not because if we sign him for £8 million, he's going to need to start pretty early in the season, isn't he? So yeah, it's a difficult one to know where to look. I think we probably need to look for a bit more experience. It's a shame Southampton went up and Taylor Harwood-Bellis went there, because I think he's one that looks like he's got everything about him to step up.
Yeah, well, another one that was in the playoffs and didn't actually get promoted, sadly, was Rodon. Obviously, he's a Tottenham. No, yeah, he's a Tottenham player, isn't he? On loan at Leeds. I think Leeds are obviously very keen to get him back. We haven't actually been linked with him at the moment, but he's a name that's certainly been put out there, as Thomas said there in the chat, and he's, again, another one, 26 years old and can potentially make that step. He's proper international, played 40 odd times for Wales, so he might be one that could to make that step up.
I think he'd be a really good signing, Joe Rodon, because I thought he was Leeds' best defender by quite some distance throughout nearly all the last season. He scored a goal for us at Portman Road as well, which obviously helps, turning in a Caden Jackson cross. But he's a player that I'm surprised we haven't been linked with, because it's difficult. Because you look at the Leeds squad, and it felt like a lot of their players, even if we were promoted, would be out of reach for us. To sort of like their best players like Nonto, Somerville, even someone like Ethan Ampadu. I think the fee to get him away from Leeds and what we need to pay him, I just don't think we'd be capable of doing so. But yeah, Joe Rodon, just does sort of slip into that nice area, because if it's a choice of another year at Leeds, knowing that they're going to not have Somerville for them this year, not have this, or a year at Ipswich, knowing he's going to be a Premier League player again, I think it's an easier decision than it might appear.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, before we head on to the centre midfield, there's been a few more links, actually quite a few links, including one or two today. We'll have a quick word from our sponsor.
Innovation Labs, providing co-working and innovation hubs across East Anglia. We're the perfect place for remote workers, freelancers, startups or innovators to do business. Our unique member network creates extensive business development and collaboration opportunities. Hot desks are available from £20 a day or £99 per month, with business coaching also available from £50. Innovation Labs, turning your ideas into multi-million pound businesses. Located in Stowmarket, Ipswich, Sudbury, with new sites in Thetford, Norwich and Kuala Lumpur, opening soon.
And a quick note on Innovation Labs, actually, everybody. There is a promo at the moment for a free hot desk every Monday in the off season. We'll put the details of it on our socials, but if you want to grab a spot in those locations, including Kuala Lumpur, then keep an eye on our socials and say it's a free hot desk every Monday during the close season. We've also got the NordVPN promo still going on. The links for that will be in the pod description. And obviously, we also had the pod earlier in the week. Mikey and Izzy joined Rich to discuss what potentially changes in terms of step up to the Premier League. Obviously, Mikey and Izzy have both been involved in and around the Premier League from a media perspective, and it's a fascinating little insight into the changes that we may notice when we head back to Portman Road in August. So yeah, please give that a look as well. Moving on to centre midfield, Joe. Again, let me just quickly grab what we got there. Obviously, we're just talking about two positions really in centre midfield. Morsey and Luongo obviously being the mainstay of that, with potentially Taylor being there or thereabouts. I'd like to know your thoughts on Taylor and Luongo in terms of the step up to the Premier League. El Mazzuni we've got there, and there's been a few little words here and there about him potentially moving on. So thinking that the captain's going to be a nailed-on starter. Those other three, Joe, were your thoughts on El Mazzuni, Taylor and Luongo?
Yeah, I think El Mazzuni will likely leave this summer. I imagine we've taken the option on him just to secure a fee, because he's still a player that's been in demand. He's had another really good loan spell at Leyton Orient in League One, just sadly cut short by an injury, which might even rule him out of pre-season, which means he hasn't even got a chance to try and make an impact here, which is a shame for him, but it would have been a big ask for him to do so. Luongo, yeah, been a fantastic player, but there were a few games last year where it did feel like he struggled to deal with the physicality in the midfield, sometimes in the athleticism there, and
yeah,
it's harsh because there was only two of them in there, and it was often two against three in there. But I think we need one of those big Premier League athletes in there, don't we, who can get about the pitch. And Jack Taylor, he's a player who can get about the pitch, but I do think his role is going to be a bit further forward this year. It happened a lot in the last sort of maybe 10 to 12 games when he was coming on as sub. He was sort of coming off a kind of Chaplin or Amari Hudson playing in that 10 role as a more sort of an 8/10, so like a box-to-box midfielder, but someone with more focus on attacking than defending. So I think this probably could be one of our lightest areas of the team. I think we've probably got Morsey, Luongo there, and I think Taylor is maybe elsewhere in the sort of team, and El Mazzuni is out the door. So effectively we've got two there, one of which both in their 30s,
yeah,
both struggling. So this is where a big chunk of change is going to need to be spent here this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting also whether the type of player we get in to play alongside Morsey, whether it's a Morsey clone to be ready for the onslaught of a Premier League centre midfield, or whether it is someone who's maybe a bit more forward-looking. Those that have been linked so far early on in the close season, John Lundstrom was linked up for his own Rangers, are now out of contract, predominantly known for his spells at Sheffield United, I would have thought, by virtue of going up with them into the Premier League and also consolidating in the Premier League for a couple of seasons before having 3 years at Rangers. He's probably one that does tick the experience box. Joe, you thought 30 years old, a bit of a combative centre midfielder, more in the Morsey role, you would have thought. Another couple, Ben Sheaf, who we may well know from Coventry, coming up against him a couple of times last year, and he was probably one of their standout players, and quite an easy link to make, I would have thought, in terms of us being interested in him. Played well against us, and I suppose what we may be slightly hamstrung by is the success of Wharton going from Blackburn to Palace to England in such a short period of time that all of a sudden Premier League clubs are taking admiring glances towards 20-something-year-old centre midfielders from the Championship.
Yeah, but I think Sheaf is 26, is he?
Yeah.
25, 26. So he doesn't strike you as one that's going to go sort of anywhere in the Championship, anywhere in the Premier League, sort of in the top 8, 9 part of it. And so it's that those middle clubs. Do they see a 26-year-old? Most clubs there are looking for somebody that they can bring in and potentially pump up their value and sell on. I don't think he's one of those. So I think we're probably in the right range to sign Ben Sheaf. And I think he would be a really nice balance with Sam Morsey in there. He played more on the left, sort of when I've watched for Coventry against us. He sort of drifted to that left channel more, where Sam Morsey drifted to the right channel. And he's one, I think we've been linked with him a few times. And sometimes you don't know whether it's just fans hoping that we're linked with him as opposed to actual concrete evidence of it. But he's a good player. Lewis O'Brien, we've been linked with today, another player who ticks a lot of boxes for versatility. He just made a bad move to Nottingham Forest. I think
he wasn't the only one to make a bad move that summer to Nottingham Forest, was he?
There's
2 dozen of them.
Yeah, and he left Huddersfield. I think he was 23 when he left Huddersfield. He'd captained them into the playoffs. That year they'd lost in the final, and he went to Forest for £8 million, and they managed to sign so many players in that first window that he wasn't even registered for the squad for the Premier League. He's been on loan at Middlesbrough this year and done really well there from all accounts. And also we know sort of Kieran McKenna and Michael Carrick are still good friends. Their teams play a similar style of football, so we sort of know what he'd look like in an Ipswich system there. So he's potentially one. He's one that is very versatile with what he can do. He can be the sitter. He can be a box-to-box guy. He can get up and around the pitch. So yeah, he's one I quite like the look of. I think there's also Pierre Ekwa we were linked with at the start of the summer by the same reports as Dan Ballard at that time. Again, he had a brilliant season at Sunderland in 22-23, and like the rest of the club there, just sort of seemed to have a poor year this year. But he's one that you think could be worth serious money in the future. Lovely left foot, big, mobile, gets around the pitch.
22 years old.
Yeah, it was really good against us on the opening day of the season there as well. He looks a total natural physical specimen. The sort of he looks like he's got the Premier League physicality, which is something we're going to need to add to the squad. But yeah, we're going to need to sign someone who's going to be looking to take over from Sam Morsey. He's not going to be able to go forever. He might only have one more year effectively at the Premier League at the real top level of it. So yeah, this is where we're going to need to make a big difference.
Yeah, I like Ekwa as well. You say he just looks like a powerful athlete, but also been brought up within the academies, hasn't he? Didn't quite make it at West Ham, but I think he's probably just a bit young to break through there at West Ham at the time. And if you can sign a 22-year-old who does okay in the Premier League, his value's only going to go one way. Quick note here from Callum saying that raiding Sunderland doesn't seem like a good idea. I think you can probably look at things that were going on potentially behind the scenes at Sunderland may have affected a few people's performances last year. And then another one, just a brief one that was mentioned as well, is Kayembe from Watford. Seemed a bit of a strange link. He's just pretty much a jobbing Championship centre midfielder, and he's the guy that had that shot/stroke tackle against us, didn't he, in the last throws of the match at home? Almost went in, didn't it, at the Churchman's End? But he's only really a semi-regular for Watford. I don't think you'd be hoping with set of sights maybe a little bit higher than him, with all due respect.
Yeah, decent player, but I think he was signed more as a sort of defensive player. Was playing a bit further forward for Watford. Loved a long shot, did okay, but he's one that maybe if you could pick him up for a couple of £1 million, you take him and just have him as an option to try and develop in your squad. But he's not someone you want to spend 5, 6, 7 million quid on and try and have them as a key part of your team. He's one for the sort of lower reaches of the squad.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, that's the centre midfielders that we've been linked with so far. In terms of attacking midfielders, we'll lump them all together because, as we know, they're all pretty much interchangeable in terms of their roles and their positions. And the four that we know are obviously at the moment Nathan Broadhead, Marcus Harness, who I saw in Subway a couple of days ago in Colchester. A salad he was having, by the way, not a bacon baguette or something. Connor Chaplin and Wes Burns, the four that we all know and love. In terms of their roles then, Joe, do you see any of that? And obviously I haven't mentioned one name that had to leave us and go back to his parent club, but we'll mention in a second. But you said earlier about potential ceilings for Broadhead, for example, but of those four that we've mentioned there, do you see any of those potentially moving on?
Well, I guess there's a possibility that Marcus Harness moves on because he started very few games for us last season, and in the sort of second half of the season started barely any. I can't even remember him starting a game in the second half of the season there, and by the end of the season when Wes Burns was back from injury, he wasn't even in the match day 20. So I think if you're not getting in the match day 20 as an attacking player, your numbers, your card is marked really. And I'd imagine, say, Caden Jackson had a year left on his contract and Marcus Harness was one whose contract had expired. Marcus Harness would have been released in the way Caden Jackson has done, because I think they're both capable. But he's a good physical player, good presser. I'm sure he's a good trainer. He'll work hard in that, and he's probably in a position where, because he was signed for decent money in League One and now he's a Premier League player, he's probably on a contract that isn't commensurate with his ability level. So it might just be a case that we just have him here as a squad option. He doesn't get many minutes, but who knows? Players can pop up and surprise you, can't they? But I imagine he'll just be another body around the squad.
Yeah, it's all about squad management and the numbers that we've got. And obviously, he may be one that potentially leaves later in the window once we've managed to get a few more targets in through the door. In terms of those that we've been linked with, obviously the main name is Amari Hutchinson. It's been out there in the press for a little while that we're after him. There's rumours that we've made a bid for him. There's rumours of him also interesting Stuttgart in the Bundesliga. And you hear that maybe the new manager Maresca wants to see him in the flesh. I'm not entirely sure managers need to see players in the flesh anymore. They'll just rely on the guys that buy and sell trade players to do the business on their behalfs. And you would have thought that any new signings coming into Chelsea, they seem to be buying young attacking midfielders hand over fist at the moment for multi millions of pounds. So you would have thought that he will move on from Chelsea. It's just a case of where. Charlie here says 15 million plus a sell-on clause is a fair deal. Joe, do you think we'll be doing everything within our remit to try and get him back one way or another?
Yes, without a doubt, we'll be trying really hard to get him back. But we're not going to be held over a barrel. And I'd say, I think for Fabrizio Romano, you had Chelsea want to, or they'll be selling him this summer. They've decided fee of 25 to 30 million. Well, we're not going to be paying a fee of 25 to 30 million for him. It's just too much money for A, for him, B, for us. So, and I can't see that Stuttgart would be paying that sort of money for him. So I think you're going to end up in that sort of 12 to 15 million pound range with top ups for staying up, England internationals if he doesn't declare for Jamaica, appearances, a sell on. You're looking in that sort of range, and if we can get him, we will be trying to get him. And I'm sure if we can get a fee agreed, if we can match what Stuttgart want to pay, if they are in for him, we've got a fantastic chance of getting him. Because while Stuttgart is Champions League football, there's a lot of good reasons why you want to come here. Kieran McKenna being number one of them. Number two is that you're going to be a regular in a Premier League team. If you can do that, and who'd put it past him to score eight goals and get 8 assists for us in the Premier League. And if you do that, you're on the England radar. Everyone's watching you. All the big clubs are watching you. It's a much more visible route to success than just popping up in the Champions League knockout stages, because that's the only time anyone from England is going to be watching German teams effectively. Even sort of Harry Kane's over there. You don't hear huge amounts about him other than his goal scoring exploits until it's the knockout stage of the Champions League. That's the only thing that matters. So, like I say, but it would be a fantastic move for Amari to go out there, no doubt. But I think for his career, he'd be better off staying in England. And if you can stay somewhere and be a regular, which he would here, then yeah, that'd be a great option for him.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have thought that a fee of £10 to £12 million is going to put us off in any shape, way, or form either, which is a fantastic position to be in from our perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, and you talk about sort of when you sign players, you sort of got your known knowns, your known unknowns, your unknown unknowns, and all that jazz. But ultimately, we've got as much information as we possibly can have on Amari. There aren't any surprises to catch us out from here that anyone in any right mind could be aware of. Where when you spend a lot of money, you've got to do a lot of due diligence. Well, all our due diligence is done,
and both ways, with him, with us as well.
Yeah, he knows exactly what he's coming into here. He knows that it's a sellout crowd every week, the crowd that supports you, a good sort of changing room, sort of leaders in there, people he gets on with, a manager who's sort of turned him from a player going out on his first loan to the most exciting player outside the Premier League, effectively.
Shy Shark here saying that Chelsea want 30 million. Well, they might want 30 million, but they may not get 30 million. Let's say it's just a starting point, isn't it? And there'll be discussions. And I say I can't imagine we'll be put off by a figure that's half that. But yeah, as Joe says, is Stuttgart going to be paying anything like that amount? And is he really a £30 million player at the moment from after one decent 2/3 of a season in the Championship? Possibly not. Other players that we've been linked with really early in the summer. Jamal Lowe was a name that's linked. I've seen it pop up in the chat. He's
been released now, hasn't he?
Yeah. I would have thought he was probably one. I don't think we'd been promoted at that point. I don't think the season had ended. So he looked, to my eyes, more potentially of a Championship signing had we not been promoted. He's one that we could have utilised potentially after playing the last 5 years in the Championship. I can't imagine at this point in his career he's ready for the step up to the Premier League potentially. Another one that's been linked a couple of times. Another one of those is Zian Fleming from Millwall. He's a name that's popped up 2 or 3 times. Linked with Burnley last summer, had a bid or two, maybe knocked back by Millwall. Hasn't had as good a season this season, and therefore his price has potentially dropped. Do you know much about him, Joe? And is he a significant upgrade on what we have already?
Not masses on him. He obviously had an excellent first season at Millwall, really good numbers, and I think there was talk of sort of up to 15 million quid for him from Burnley, but didn't get it over the line. Then this year, like everyone at Millwall, after they made the sort of managerial changes, he didn't have a great season. But it's like, is it a good time to buy somebody when they're on sort of the way down, where on the back of a down season, like we're talking about Pierre Ekwer earlier? Yeah, last summer he'd been 18 million. This year he might be 5 million. Last summer Fleming was 15 million. This summer he might be 4 million. And it's just, can you get them back to the level that you think you can? But for me, I've spoken to a couple of Millwall fans. They don't seem to think he'd have the sort of speed of thought and physicality to step up to the top tier. So it's not one that is massively exciting for me from what I've read and what I've seen of him. But again, you sort of got to trust the judgment of the squad, of the management team and the recruitment team if he is one that we look to get over the line. But there's not that many spaces for grabs up in that front three, because you're going to get what 7 up there, and you've got 4 already. And we're talking about Amari, then you talk about Zian Fleming, and then that's 1 more on top of that. It doesn't seem enough. I think you want to get 2 or 3 real quality players in that range. They're your match winners, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Especially the way that we play, they are exactly that. They are your match winners, and you would hope that would be the area of the team where you want to add some real, Premier League quality, as much as you can do with our budget as it is at the moment. Maybe I'll come on to that in a second, but just a quick one. Saman Ghoddos was a name that was mentioned. Brentford, another one that's been released actually. Predominantly a right winger, Iranian international, albeit born and raised in Sweden. He's been Brentford for 4 years, been a semi-regular in the Premier League, played 50 odd times for Iran, so it's decent pedigree there. But it really only plays the Wes Burns role. But I say it's one that we've been linked with. Another we've been linked with Miguel Almiron, and I will quote here from the news story. I'll quote this verbatim. Ipswich Town are believed to be eager to sign talismanic Newcastle United attacker Miguel Almiron for a fee of around £21 million. And to be fair, the source for that was a guy with 325,000 Twitter followers, so he wasn't some kid in his bedroom making crap up. But people will know Miguel Almiron. He's a 30-year-old Paraguayan international with 200 odd appearances for Newcastle in the Premier League, and was one of the first sort of links of the summer. Really, Joe, do you see anything in that? Aren't we, as you said right at the very, very, very beginning, we don't know the targets that we're aiming at. We don't know the level of player that we're aiming at. But do you see someone of the ilk of Almiron coming in for 20 million quid and the associated salary that will be needed on the back of a fee that high?
No, it's in a word. I think he's a profile of player that could be of interest to us. He's, like I say, he's been an excellent Premier League player. He's helped Newcastle into the Champions League, but I think the links were with us and a couple of Saudi clubs, weren't they? And ultimately, if it's going to be, we're not going to compete financially with Saudi Arabian clubs because they're signing players for fees which are just stupid, for wages which are just stupid, in an attempt to grow their league at the behest of their government, effectively. Where we aren't going to be paying £21 million for a 30-year-old and paying him 85, 90 grand a week. It's just not going to happen. And if you were doing something like that, you'd be doing it for somebody who is a guaranteed, maybe like a number 9 or something like that. If there was, say, Chris Wood, just as an example, someone who was available who scored double-digit Premier League goals for 6 of the last 7 seasons. Yeah, you might blow the budget on someone like that, but you're not going to blow the budget on a guy who's just been a good Premier League player for Newcastle. Yeah,
and that's similar to the link that another Joe has mentioned here, and you referenced earlier. Emil Smith-Rowe was another that was a name that was thrown around beginning of the beginning of the close season. But again, you would have thought that fees and wages would be prohibitive to us at this particular juncture of our Premier League journey, but
I guess the only way, and I don't think it will happen with Smith-Rowe, is that I know Mikel Arteta has been a big fan of his, and he just hasn't been able to get himself sorted with injury. Whether he's one of those ones where you do want a buy him with a buyback clause in it for Arsenal, so effectively just a 1-year renting of the player as opposed to a loan of the player, to see whether he can get back up to the levels of form he previously had, which is good enough for Arsenal. Along those sort of lines, but I don't see it happening. He's a really highly rated player, and if he is available, it wouldn't surprise me to see like an Aston Villa in the Champions League going after him, or Fulham who are trying to push on into that top 10 again, or Brentford, Brighton, those sort of teams who are just much more stable than we are.
Yeah. In terms of wish lists, there's a few names that have been thrown out there. HCH, I saw this earlier on. Callum O'Hare, a decent option in that around about that number 10 Connor Chaplin role. There were rumours earlier of him heading off to West Ham, I think was a club that was mentioned. Neil here suggests Dan James as an option. And there's a couple, Jack and Colin and Trevor, all suggesting Morgan Whittaker. Now, obviously, these are Championship players. We know these players very, very well, having been playing up against them for the last year, more than that in Morgan Whittaker's case. But as you said, Joe, in terms of these positions needing real star quality potentially, are we going to be fishing in a bigger pond than the Championship, or are we in a position to be able to sort of skim off the very cream of the Championship and hope that they can make the step up?
Well, I guess the very cream of the Championship, the players who haven't gone up, is Crescencio, Somerville, Willie Gnonto, and we're not going to be able to attract those here. They're going to be going higher than we are. Dan James is an interesting one, isn't he? Because we have tended to sign more British players than not, and he's a guy, international, has had previous Premier League experience. He's been at, was he at Man United at the same time as Kieran McKenna? Quite possibly. I don't know for sure on that one, but he's a player that comfortably keeps Wes Burns out of the Wales team, and he can be a centre forward when you're playing a sort of very counter-attacking game when you're not trying to hold the ball up. He could play in the centre of the pitch with that pace. Out on the right, he could maybe do the role Wes Burns does. So maybe he's an interesting one on that side of it there. But we haven't mentioned sort of Jeremy Sarmiento, who we had here last year, and I think he's one that we should try and get back. But it's just these loan rules and how it works on those, or is there any chance of being able to get him done on a permanent basis? I think he's one that I think looked really improved as the season went on, and when he had that 2-week break, his first one where he hadn't been off on international duty, sort of leading to the end of the season, he came back from that looking really, really sharp and really flying. And obviously we know he's the man for the big moments, like sort of Martin Reuter was when we were promoted last time. Sarmiento seemed to take that mantle on from him, and maybe we need to sign him as well.
And he sings his own song, which is something that Martin Reuter would definitely do. There's a couple of more names that popped up here. Rob says about Jack Clark, which
big fan of Jack Clark. There was talk of him going maybe a little bit higher up the league, but when push comes to shove, you might not get that interest. And if we're willing to act quickly on it, I think he'd be a really good signing on that sort of left-hand side to sort of compete with Nathan Broadhead on that left-hand side.
It's just nice to be having these conversations, isn't it, about other old Championship teams as best players that we can potentially go and nick off them. MK, I suggest it's probably unlikely we'll be getting Oscar Bob on loan. I think he's probably going to get a few games under his belt up in Manchester. So yeah, in terms of the attacking midfielders, they're the ones that have been linked with us so far. So finally, moving up to the forward section, as we know, we have George Hurst, our current first choice striker, Ali Al-Hamidi with a decent length contract behind him as our current backup. The other two names mentioned there, obviously Freddie Ladapo, Ghassan Hadmi. You would think we would be doing our damnedest to try and get off the books, even though they've both got a year left on their contract. Even if it's another loan deal out to the lower leagues, just to say to get a chunk of their wages off the books would be it. But again, like I mentioned about centre defence, Joe, experience is what's needed. You did mention like Chris Wood in passing just then, but is it that sort of level of experience that we need heading into a Premier League campaign?
I don't think you'd get someone of that experience and that good effectively, but it is you do think you need something, because you remember this time last year there was a lot of talk about George Hurst. Oh, is he going to be able to step up to the Championship, because he's never scored a goal at that level. He's tried and he stepped up brilliantly to the Championship, but it's another big step up for him. I think physically he's got the capability to do so, and athletically he's a player that could do so. But again, you can only really get at most sort of 60, 65 minutes out of him each week, because the way they play the game, him, Connor Chaplin, Wes Burns, Nathan Broadhead, it is just run yourself into the ground as hard as you can for 60, 65 minutes, and then we're going to replace you for the end of the game. And as much as we liked what we saw of Ali Al-Hamidi, it's probably too early for him to be playing that sort of amount of football week in, week out in the Premier League. He's got a long way to go to get there. So it's just a case of trying to find somebody who can balance that workload with George Hurst in the first instance. Yeah.
Now, just going through some of the links that have happened so far, obviously Eddie Nketiah was one that was linked along with Emil Smith-Rowe, but you would have thought it'd be in a similar boat in terms of transfer fee and wages. But watch this space. You never know. One that was linked and has been linked again recently, although he was today linked with a £30 million move to notorious moneybags Everton, was Armando Broja from Chelsea. He's been linked with us. He's been linked with Brentford. But in terms of physicality, Joe, as you were talking about, they're taking on workload off of George Hurst. He's another 6'3" mobile striker, so fits that bill. He's been out on loan from Chelsea to their parent club, is it Vitesse? Southampton, Fulham. I don't think that went particularly well, the last loan for the second half of the season at Fulham. And obviously he wouldn't be a cheap signing. So yeah, we'll see how that one.
They were saying 50 million for him in January, weren't they? And they had no takers, and he went to Fulham on loan for a couple of substitute appearances. Now it's 30 million. I wonder what they actually end up getting for him. I'm not saying he's one that we'd be able to afford, but I don't see that he's a £30 million player.
No, not for a striker who doesn't score goals in the Premier League. You think you've got to set your sights a little bit lower, I'd have thought. And then the other names that have been linked currently aren't really ones that have set the pulse racing. And a few people have been mentioning it here. I'll pop it up. Sam Gallagher is a name that won't go away. Paul's saying he's not entirely sure what we'd need. Charlie along similar lines, albeit not quite as polite. But yeah, it's a name that won't go away. But you might think that's just agent talk after we had 3 failed bids for him in January and ended up leading us to a Kiefer Moore signing, and the rest is history, as it were. But we do tend to keep our targets, don't we, Joe, from window to window, albeit that might change now we've gone from league to league to league, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, Jack Taylor, Jeremy Sarmiento, guys we tried to sign in previous windows, confirmed that we tried to sign in previous windows before we got them. So I wouldn't be amazingly surprised if Sam Gallagher's one that we tried to go back in for a knockdown price of £1 million or something to get him out of there. And I guess at that point, is it better to? I know he's not one that's just going to get everybody's sort of juices flowing, but effectively, if you could sign Sam Gallagher for £1 million and let Ali Al-Hamidi go on loan to the Championship, and then still sign your target, are you in a better position to have those 3 than you would having number 1 target, Hurst and Al-Hamidi? I'd say you probably are. I think Sam Gallagher is probably a better bet than Ali Al-Hamidi is next year, but it's just how easy it is to sort those dominoes out, isn't it?
Yeah. And as you say, if it's a cheap per deal and he comes in as your third choice striker, maybe just one that we know can potentially fit that bill should your first couple of first choice strikers get injured.
Because the problem is, what we have is when you're playing one for 60 minutes and one for 30 minutes each week, if you have an injury there, it puts a huge amount of pressure on your third choice striker. If that is Ali Al-Hamdi, it puts a lot on his play. If George Hurst ruptures his leg again, his hamstring, and is out for 4 months, that can kill you in the season. Yeah. If you had to play it, and then Ali Al-Hamdi just isn't capable of stepping up next season, because he's been playing mostly in League 2 for the last sort of 2 years. If he isn't capable of playing Premier League football and you've got to get 30 minutes out of him every week for 4 months, that could be the difference between going up and staying down. So you might need to secure yourself more in the roles which are, because we talk about having 2 players for each position, but the reality is we probably have 16 players that play at least 25 minutes each week. And it's the ones there, the backups of the backups that come on more frequently. So the forwards, the attacking midfielders, those 4, that's probably where you need, rather than 2 players per position, you might need 2.5 players per position. So you might need 10 to cover those 4 roles as opposed to 8. And at centre back, you can get away with it a little bit more because generally the guys that play are going to play 90 minutes and play week in, week out there. You're not going to just be chopping and changing those around horses for courses. So there's a lot of balancing to do and a lot to work out there.
Yeah, there is. Another name that's mentioned was Daniel Jebison for Sheffield United, but again, he's 20 years old. He hasn't got that much experience behind him, but he is 6'3" and mobile. So you can see why we're being linked with these particular players, or their names certainly crop up. And again, he's a name that we've been linked with previously. A few names that have cropped up in the chat. Colin's gone for Latte Lath from Borough. Again, as you were saying, as has Philip, as has Craig. As you say about the similarities with the way that Borough play, again, you would have thought if a deal was to be done with a Borough player, they'd be more easily integrated into the way that we play and what we ask of our players playing in certain positions. And he was a player that impressed against us last year, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he was also a player that Middlesbrough paid £5 billion for last summer, and he's come over and started the season relatively slowly goal-wise, but has ended the season with something like 18 goals in 27 90s, or a really, really good goal record. Looked a really good player in the second half of the season. So if they bought him for £5 billion, they're going to want at least 3 times that to sell him this summer, aren't they? Because they've done the hard work, they've got him in, and they've got the guy settled for next season, ready to hit the ground running and to give it a good sort of tilt at promotion next year. So yeah, he's going to be one that's going to be very, very expensive. And then you're back in the case in that position of, do you want to spend a lot of money on a player who's not got Premier League experience?
Yeah.
And then another option, I don't know if he's been linked with us yet, but obviously like Sammy Smolix has always been spoken about in dispatches for Ipswich, but he's, again, what sort of money is he going to be? If you could get him at a decent knockdown price, he'd probably be a good fit here, because off the back of last season, I know people sort of claim he's a one-season wonder, but I don't think that's the case. I think he's sort of been building to that, and he just looks really, really good. But is that a deal that's going to be easy to do? You imagine there's some sort of break clause in his deal, otherwise he wouldn't have signed it when he did with Blackburn last year.
Yeah, but as you say, you know, it's the money, it's the cost, isn't it? If he costs £8 million, £10 million, is he £8 million, £10 million better than Connor Chaplin, for example? But yeah, we shall see. Another couple of names that have popped up: Shubha Akpom, potentially. Rodney asks if we've moved on from Kiefer Moore. What do you reckon, Joe?
Yes, probably, because I think he was the right player at the right time for us last year, in just that he was a quality addition there. But to buy him, we'd need to be giving him a sort of 2-3 year contract when he's really a failed Premier League striker. He's one of those ones that sits in that zone between the Premier League and the Championship. Was excellent for us last year. Couldn't have done more in that loan spell for us. But it was interesting that as soon as George Hurst was back fit, George Hurst was back starting and Kiefer Moore was back on the bench, and straight away you saw what Kieran McKenna wants in his striker, that ability to go in behind and come short and be more of an all-rounder. But yeah, as an option, I think Kiefer Moore would be a great option, but you don't want to be picking up his 45 grand a week contract and giving him 2 years on top of it at age 31, 32 to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think I've read that he's been linked again, unsurprisingly, with Cardiff. I think they're still sniffing around him as well, which probably, having seen the January to May or January to April Kiefer Moore, they've thought, you know, he could probably do a job for us, and he probably wouldn't be averse to heading down to Wales. Have we moved on from Jay Stansfield? Asks Joe. Is he one of the ones that we just leave down now in the Championship?
Yeah, I think so. But again, he's one that we've been linked with a few times and tried to sign a few times. So maybe one we go back in for. But I think he probably had too good a season at Birmingham now to be available on a permanent transfer at a fee that would suit us. So I think he's swept up their play. I know they got relegated and they had a very up and down season, but he's not going to be available for $3 million now, is he, to come in? And he's probably not quite ready for the Premier League either. Sort of, he's small, wiry. Needs another loan season at the top of the Championship, I think, which is obviously what they were trying to sort for him last year, but didn't.
Yeah. And Joe's come up with another couple here: Brereton Diaz, or maybe Liam Delap for a decent price. I suppose the Delap thing again is maybe an experience thing, but you can see his trajectory only really going one way if everything clicks. But Brereton Diaz is an interesting option.
Yeah, he did well at Sheffield United last year. He didn't play a huge amount, but when he did come in, he did look good, and that was in a really, really poor side, like a historically poor side. He looked quite good in. He's a name that's been linked with Southampton, I think, as well this window. So it looks like he's maybe within range for us there. But yeah, I think he'd be a really good sign, Ben Brereton Diaz, and I think he must have played with George Hurst when they were at Blackburn together, sort of briefly. But that'd be a good sign in there. And who was the other name? Sorry.
Delap.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, he looked really good for Hull against us, and I think he's got the qualities which Kieran McKenna wants in a striker, that real raw pace.
Physicality as well.
Physicality, big. And it's just that, we've sort of mentioned it a few times now, it's like Premier League experience is going to be 10 million quid. Do you want to sign a player for 10 million quid to hang your hat on? And how confident would you feel if you had George Hurst, Liam Delap, and another Sam Gallagher, Ali Al-Hamidi as your free strikers? It feels short of what's required in the Premier League, even though I think he's going to be a really good player. But we spoke at the very start of the pod about Burnley and them signing a lot of young players and spending a lot of money and not really getting anything out of them. And the year before, Southampton did the same. They signed Shea Charles and Samuel Edozie and Lavia from Chelsea and a couple of others from Man City, Bazzuno from Man City, and they spent about 100 million quid on young players, on prospects, got relegated. Yeah, they've bounced back now, but by sort of gain of winning the playoff final, so it wasn't like they walked the league. And it is I say it's very much like a football manager type move. You get promoted, you search for who the best 5-star prospects are under 21, you sign them all, and then you stay up in that first season and you just keep going, and all of a sudden you've got the best players in the world. But in real life, it doesn't work like that. In real life, you need Premier League experience, you need that nous, you need that know-how, and you need sort of some leaders in there, don't you? And I think you can't just worry too much about resale value and players improving. The biggest job we've got now is to stay up, and if we stay up for 1 year, we're in a fantastic position because the parachute payment's extended. We're a more established club. We can then sign better players now. So everything we do this summer has got to be primary focus, plan A, on staying up, not on, oh, if we go down, they might help us get back up. Oh, if we go down, if they have a good season, we'll be able to sell them on. It's got to be about improving the level of the squad to play Premier League football to stay up this year.
Yeah, and it may be. I know we mentioned Chris Wood, but in terms of levels of particularly unsexy signings as a striker, it may be that we do go for that type of again, not that level, but that type of striker just to get us a bit of, I say, experience through the door. One name I'm going to throw out there, I stuck on Telegram earlier, is Michy Batshuayi, the old Chelsea player
where's he at the moment? Turkey?
Free transfer. He's out of contract. Yeah, he's had his teeth done. He's had his hair done. Most recently with Fenerbahce. He scored a lot of goals in the Super League for Fenerbahce. He's only 30, out of contract, 50 caps for Belgium.
Yeah, good player, isn't he?
Yeah. Terry asks here, is Ellis Sims too pricey, not worth it? Well, as you were saying about people wanting, money back, you're talking about Latte Lath and Borough wanting a return on their investment. You would have thought that Coventry will be wanting a return on their investment for Sims, which was what, 6-8 million quid last summer.
I think it was about 4 up front, wasn't it? And then bits to come from there. So I can't imagine they paid much on top of that. But I find him quite unimpressive to watch when you see him. Like he obviously scores goals, but he just sort of seems so slow and cumbersome with the ball, and I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as a good player. But then you look at it in the second half of the season, scored sort of like 16 goals. So he knows where the net is, but he's not one that I'd swap George Hurst for. Put it that way.
No, absolutely. Okay, cool. Oh well, thank you very much for that, Joe. So we've stepped through all the positions in the team, and we've stepped through all the current links that we've managed to capture so far. There are a couple of questions here from a couple of people. We won't go on for too long. We've gone over the hour mark, but we'll just answer these couple of questions. Lee asks, what is the limit to what is our limit to spend in this window, Joe? Obviously, we don't know, but
it's how you structure deals. But I think if you look at Burnley last year, I think they spent about 90 million tops. So you'd imagine that's probably, if not the top end, it's going to be not far off of that sort of 90 to 100 million. So I think somewhere maybe in that sort of 70, 80 range is probably where we're going to end up being. But it depends on how you structure deals, what you do. But we know we don't have any issues with regards to cash. So any deals we want to do, we can do. It's just making sure they fit in with what we want to do, that they leave us in a good enough position if the worst were to happen for the following year.
Yeah. And we'll do one more here for HCH. I did see it earlier, but you pinged it again. Thank you very much for that. What about new contracts for the current squad? I suppose I don't know. Do you reward them? The guy, obviously, they'll be getting promotion bonuses and promotion rises anyway as part of their existing deals. So they're being heartily compensated for the success they've had so far. I suppose it's a case of whether do you reward them on the assumption that they will do well, Joe, or do you suck it and see in terms of how they progress in the first few months of the season and then look to compensate thereafter?
I guess it depends on who they are. I think Leith Davis has got 1 year remaining on his deal with an option. I guess you probably try and give him a new deal so that come next summer, when he's had another 18 assists in the Premier League this time, you're not selling a player with 1 year left on his contract, just selling a player on a multi-year deal. So I think he's one that you would try and tie down. I think the rest, two of the other ones out of contract, we've got the squad picture. I think Luke Wolford's got another year, but I think it's a year and an option. So I think most of the ones in there who Sam Morsey again, but he's almost a special case because of his age. And if you keep doing well, he'll stay. And at some point, he might want to go. And there's not going to be a huge amount you can do about it, because it'll probably be maybe to the Saudi League or something along those lines, where if he decides to do that for his family and his sort of how important his religion is part of him there, that he wants to move out to an Islamic country, then you're not going to be able to stop him from doing stuff like that. But yeah, it's really, I'd say, only Luke Wolfenden, maybe Axel and Zabi if he starts the season well, and Leif Davis are the ones that you potentially want to reward. Wes Burns is one who is an age where
Wes Burns.
Do you want to give him another contract now? He's got a year and an option, I'd guess, on that. So you maybe want to renew him. But the problem is, if you start doing really well and all these players want top Premier League money, and you end up sort of tying yourself down to players. But I'm sure we'll be sensible with it, and I'm sure the guys are getting well recompensed at the moment. Plus, it will all be spoken about and moving on. And if they start the season well, they'll be wanting to push for new contracts straight away, and I'm sure they'll get them if they want them.
Yeah. And final question here that we'll knock on the head here, guys. From Lewis. As we're newly promoted, are major signings likely to have relegation release clauses? I think you'd be absolutely stupid if you didn't. And he stuck a couple.
I think it means relegation release, not relegation wage cuts.
Oh, I see. Yeah. But I suppose they will want those. I suppose for their own career potentially, they'll have a little knockdown value in them, maybe so they can get out the door if we need. We're not thinking about that though, Lewis. We're not thinking.
But generally, though, it would be like if we signed a player for 10 million quid. We might have a relegation release clause and they have 20 million. So it's like, if you have a brilliant season and we get relegated, we're still going to double our money on you. We're not just going to give you away if we go down, because I just don't think that as a club we want to do those sort of deals. I think Leeds had major issues because they had all these contracts issues where they basically said players can go out on loan, and the loaning club will only need to pay half their wages if we get relegated. You just set yourself up to fail so badly in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I say, we'll be on it. As Charlie says here, we have to get recruitment right, otherwise we'll find ourselves back in the Championship, which we hope doesn't happen. But as and when, as I said at the very, very, very beginning, as and when we hear anything, as and when there are rumours arising, we'll be on it. We'll stick something out. So please keep an eye on all the socials. So all of your transfer rumour needs will come from us here at Blue Monday. So very much thank you to everyone that's joined us. There's loads and loads of you in the chat. It's been great to have you here. There's loads of people watching live. So again, thanks for joining us. Apologies for the slight delay from for our start, but these things are what they are when you're going live on a Sunday night. Apologies again. So yeah, we'll see you soon. Hopefully Joe and I will be back very, very soon with a couple of spangly new signings to talk about. But in the meantime, take care and we'll see you soon.